expecting, but we're going to start on time. And I'm going to turn my webcam off because I don't like looking at myself. All right, so you guys know who I am, but for those of you who listen to the recording may not know, my name's Alan White. I'm the author of a book called Exponential Groups, and I've been coaching pastors and church leaders for the last 13 years in over 1,500 churches in various ways, shapes, and forms. But it's been really exciting. And in the last 5 or 6 years, have helped churches start over 14,000 groups, which is really cool to see things that I learned kind of in the school of hard knocks, and things that became my ceiling are actually it's the floor for the churches I've started working with, and it's very gratifying to see how they're working. And I don't know if you guys have heard, I tell these stories a lot because I get excited about them. I was working with a church in Baltimore, church of 600 people on a weekend, and they launched, we created video for their church and launched a series in January where they started 147 groups in a church of 600, which is pretty amazing. And then we created a follow-up series for those groups to go into next. And I'm continuing to work with the pastor on some stuff. So it's very exciting to see, kind of taking some of these crazy ideas and going there. So what we're going to do with the Easter Hangover, I kind of did two different parts in the blog post that I wrote, if you happen to catch that. And one has to do with kind of the personal part after Easter of taking care of yourself. And then the other part has to do with really the assimilation, discipleship, all of those components of how do you get these people connected? How do you help them to grow, especially those that made a decision on Easter? How do you help them to grow after the fact? And so I just wanted to share a few thoughts for you. And so here we go. So the Easter hangover. I know hangover is not like a good church word, but that's kind of what it feels like in a way, because you prepare, you plan for Easter well in advance. We would always kind of scramble toward Easter in our church in California. And finally, one December after we finished Christmas, I said, guys, we have Easter every year. Why do we act like it's a surprise? And so we just started planning like in January or whatever for our Easter services. But we put a lot of planning on the services. We get a big crowd on Easter Sunday or Easter weekend, or Easter week in some cases, depending on how many services. And then, that crowd clears out and there's your empty pews, and you've expended a lot of energy. And while there's a lot to celebrate, it also, you kind of feel kind of crummy after the fact. And that's where I get this idea of the Easter hangover. Now, I've always been an associate pastor. I've never been the senior pastor at a church. I was an associate pastor at the church I was at in California for 15 years, as well as one of several associates at the church here in Greenville, South Carolina, where I served. And then in between that, I was a vice president of another organization. So now I work for myself, so I have the best boss I ever had. So anyway, but I used to do this midweek Bible study. I didn't do Easter services, because that's when the senior pastor was on. I would usually do the week after Easter because, everybody had been there. I used to do this midweek Bible study, and it was just kind of a tradition of a church at the time, especially back before we really launched groups in a big way. And what I would find is after my midweek Bible study that I'd feel very low. I would go home. I would start doubting that I did very well. I would wonder if anybody would come back. And then, even like questioning the call of God in my life. Maybe I did the wrong thing, because you get kind of that low place and the enemy can do a number on you. And I don't know, maybe you felt like that, maybe you haven't. And what I discovered over time was that maybe I wasn't doing a bad job, and maybe I wasn't doing the wrong thing with my life. Maybe I just needed to embrace the fact that our body kind of operates on an ebb and a flow. And that is when we put a lot of energy, we put a lot of effort, we put a lot of adrenaline into a situation, and then our body wants to rest. And sometimes it will prevent us from continuing on simply because it wants to rest. And so I would go home and all these thoughts would be going through my head. And then I discovered the best thing that I could do after a midweek Bible study was to try not to evaluate what I presented or how I prepared or how people responded or anything else. The best thing that I could do was go home. This is my single days, have dinner, good old TV dinner, watch an episode of LA Law, which came on about 10 o'clock at night back in the 90s in California, and go to sleep. And so that way I got a little food in my body. I was distracted from my thoughts and I got to sleep. And then the next day I would maybe take into account what was going on and maybe if there are things that I needed to tune up in my Bible study. The reality is with that Bible study, people were just in a habit of coming to a midweek Bible study. So it didn't matter if I was teaching or if somebody else was teaching. It didn't matter if I was good or if I was terrible, because they were just in the habit of doing that. And I don't know, maybe they could have done it with hand puppets. Maybe that would have been more interesting. But this was what I found kind of was the cure to my midweek blues. And so in, kind of 25 years, I've studied a lot about stress and burnout and those kinds of things, worry, and just from a lot of my own need, and then developed, some workshops on it that I've taught in Christian and secular formats. But one of the things that struck me most was a book. I mentioned it in the blog post. It was written by Minirth and Meyer called How to Beat Burnout. And I discovered this book back in the 80s, actually when I was in seminary. And I thought that their path to recovery was a little unusual in that they said, first of all, when you're burnout, when you've had, and it could be, short-term burnout, you've just gone through a big weekend, you're not going to be burnout for the rest of your life, but you need to recover for a couple of days. Or it could be long-term burnout. You've been burning the candle at both ends for far too long, and you just need to recover. And so before, we get into, I'm going to go out and do something sinful that's going to get me fired and then I can finally recover, which there are those kinds of motives that are around. Or before I just stop showing up to work, I need to focus on some things that are going to help to keep me going. And, it's interesting. I was called into ministry when I was 17 years old. So I preached my first sermon 35 years ago. And I've been in full-time ministry now for 27 years. And I used to think, well, you just go in, you do your job, and, that's, ministry is not a job, but, you do your job and you move forward, and before you know it, you retire at a happy career. And then I began to realize over the years that there are things that really take guys out of ministry for a lot of different reasons. And you look at the statistics, and they're really kind of unbelievable of how many people leave ministry every year. And then I thought, some of these things that are causing people to, abandon the church are completely preventable. And, and it's not such a matter of, well, some churches are better than others, because every church has problems because it's made up of people. And in fact, the reason I stayed at the same church for 15 years was I said, a church is like a dog with fleas, and every dog has fleas. And at least with this dog, I know what the fleas are. If I go to another dog and go to another church, I don't know what the fleas are over there. And that's not saying that you should never move. I'm just saying that, if you think, oh, we're going to go over there because they're going to have less problems, well, the problems will be waiting for you. So how do you keep going? How do you keep motivated if you find you're in that place either temporarily or, chronically burnt out? Well, the first thing Minirth and Meyer says is you need to be focused on things physically. And this is kind of a brief digest of their book is excellent. I'm sure it's out of print by now, but I would find it on Amazon or somewhere. But they said, first of all, you want to do some sort of exercise. Now, this isn't like go buy a new gym suit and sign up for a gym membership and go do, just do whatever you could do. You hang up from this webinar, all in 5 minutes early and go exercise for 5 minutes. So what could you do in 5 minutes? Could you walk out in the hall and go outside and walk around the parking lot a couple of times? I mean, what could you do right now? Don't make it complicated. The second thing is to eat well. And we know if you eat a bunch of junk, which junk is fun to eat, that we're going to feel terrible. But if we eat better, if we eat clean, that we're going to feel better. So eat well. Sleep. Put your phone away an hour before you're going to go to bed, or whatever screen you're looking at, because that keeps us awake. And allow yourself to sleep. And if you don't have anything important tomorrow, allow yourself to sleep in a little bit. And if you do have something important tomorrow, allow yourself to sleep in a little bit, but be there on time. Relax and don't feel guilty. I had a hard time with this for a very long time. I thought, well, if I just sit here and watch a show or read a book or, I'm not doing anything productive, then I would really feel guilty that I'm not accomplishing what I need to do, to fulfill God's calling on my life and to do what I need to do for the kingdom. And yet the reality is, if we don't take care of ourselves, there won't be anything left for us to give for any kind of a kingdom cause. And so being driven and ending up burning ourselves out is not the pathway to go. And I know there's an old saying, people would say, well, I'd rather burn out than rust out. I don't think either one of those are good options. I think what we need to do is we need to wear out gradually. The other thing, and this is why I appreciate the fact that Minirth and Meyer in their book puts physical first, is because a lot of times we think, well, if I pray that God would give me the strength, then I could overcome my fatigue. I could overcome my lack of sleep. I could overcome this and that and the other thing. And while all of that sounds very good, sometimes we just have to use our God-given common sense and find ways, not elaborate ways, but small ways that we can begin to take care of ourselves. And so maybe if we do have a few minutes, instead of finding out what's going on in Facebook, just, go outside and walk a little bit. Or, figure out a way. If I get up a little bit earlier in the morning, I could do this, or during lunch, or, whatever. So, and I'm not, terribly fit, but you know what? I am actually healthy. So that makes a big difference, and it affects your energy as well. After the physical part, then you focus on the emotional part. Because if you don't feel good physically, you don't feel good about anything. Emotionally, spiritually, anything else. So emotionally, you want to laugh. You want to laugh. You want to go on to your Pandora and create a channel for stand-up comedians. Now, some of them may have inappropriate comedy. I haven't done this, but somebody suggested this to me the other day. But you know what? Just listen to things that are funny and laugh. Or, watch a movie that makes you laugh. But it's important to laugh. Get together with friends and laugh, because it actually releases a lot of hormones that make us feel great. Say positive things to yourself. The enemy will beat us up, especially when we're low. And sometimes we have our own self-doubt, or we play those tapes in our head of, things that people said to us a long time ago, like you're never going to amount to anything, and, those sorts of things. And, who do I think that I am that I could accomplish anything great? We need to tell ourselves the truth. And so maybe the positive thing is to take a verse like Philippians 4, 6 through 8. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all. God is near. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything with prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will comfort your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And then it goes on to these questions. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are right. And I don't have all of that memorized. But the reason I have this kind of my life verse, this is not be anxious for nothing. Isn't that terrible? But the reality is we need to replace our thoughts that are in error, our thoughts that are negative, our thoughts that are debilitating with thoughts that are good. And so a lady went into a Christian psychologist years ago and talked about having a problem with worry and negative thinking. And the psychologist had a little 3x5 card, and on one side it said stop. And on the opposite side, I should have put this on the screen. I've actually made these. On the other side, it had Philippians 4, 6, and 7, be anxious for nothing. And he said, now every time you go down this path, every time you start worrying, every time you have these negative thoughts come in, take the card and read it out loud to yourself. First say stop, stop, and then flip it over and then read the words of that verse. So I made these cards for people, and they would have one in their bathroom and one in their car and one at their desk, their workplace, and around. And so the story is with this lady that she goes back to her psychologist the next week, and he says to her, well, how did it go? And she said, well, the first day I had to get the card out and I had to tell myself to stop 20 times. But by the end of the week, I only had to tell myself to stop twice. And again, it's replacing negative thoughts with positive thoughts. And I'm not going to get into like positive thinking and visualization and all of that. But what I do mean is that we need to tell ourselves the truth. And we need to remind ourselves, when we get to that place of worry, we need to remind ourselves about what God thinks about us, what God's called us to do, what we've been able to accomplish, and not let ourselves be bogged down by that, because it's not going to create anything good. I even have days, when I'm down, I want to turn off the lights, blow up the black balloons, and have a pity party, and I'll tell myself, okay, I'm going to allow myself to feel this way for about 10 more minutes, and then I'm going to stop this, and then I'm going to go on to something productive. And we just need to change the channel. And sometimes it's getting up and leaving the room. Sometimes it's going to have a conversation with somebody. Sometimes it's going out and having a cup of coffee, going and sitting in a park and reading a book, whatever. And then I just end it. So there is that thing of, I'm acknowledging that I feel this way. It's not necessarily wrong to feel this way, but I can't be as effective as I'd like to be if I'm going to continue to feel this way. Do something you enjoy. So find things that you enjoy and do those things. I get home at night and I put my phone down and I play with my kids. My kids are 15, 11, 9, and 3. And we laugh and have fun and do silly things, and drives my wife crazy sometimes, but do things that you enjoy. And so maybe you enjoy taking a walk. Maybe you enjoy reading a book. And even if you do that, you have this escape that's like 10, 15 minutes long. It's not that long. Then just go do that for a few minutes and get your mind off of things. I mean, even if you're playing a game on your phone, which is not like the healthiest thing in the world, but it gets your mind off of things. But do something that you enjoy. If you enjoy a sport, if you enjoy, something that's artful, if you, whatever, do something you enjoy. Avoid envy. I mean, there's always somebody who's going to do something bigger than you or be more effective than you or whatever else. But also there are a lot of other people that would give their right arm to be in the position that you guys are in, and what God's enabled you to do. So you don't want to, okay, we weren't the biggest, or we didn't do this or didn't do that, but instead you want to celebrate the good things, celebrate what God has done. And this isn't giving yourself sloppy seconds or anything like that. God is doing good things all the time, and so we want to celebrate the good things that God has done. And then lastly, after we've done the physical and the emotional, we get to the spiritual. And on the spiritual part, we want to read God's word, and not because we're going to do a Bible study, not because we're preparing for a sermon, but we want to read God's word. Now, I'm a disaster with a reading plan. I'll just admit that. Like, the one-year Bible is my nemesis. And so somebody just jumped on right then. That's a good clip to start with. But I get a few days behind, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'll take a day to catch up, and then I'm like 5 days behind, and it's like, oh, forget it, I can't do it. Or you get through you start in January, you get to the middle of February, and that's when most New Year's resolutions, flame out anyway, is the middle of February. And the middle of February in the one-year Bible, you're reading a lot in Leviticus about infectious skin diseases. And that's not a good incentive to continue either. So my best reading plan is, hold your breath, a bookmark. And if I don't read every day, I don't beat myself up for that, but I want to take time. Or I read Proverbs. And so what proverb do I read? Well, today's the 20th, so I'm going to read Proverbs 20. And if I don't read Proverbs 20 today, then I'll read Proverbs 21 tomorrow. I'm not going to beat myself up that I didn't read today. Sing worship songs and hymns. This helps us. So whether you go onto YouTube and find, somebody, find an old hymn, you can find any song you want on YouTube. And if it has the words on it, just sit and sing to yourself, or get a CD or your Pandora or whatever, put a worship channel on there and go to your car and sing. Sometimes I get a hymnal off my shelf and I go back to the hymns from my childhood, which are very comforting to me at this point in my life, which we aren't going to get into a whole worship debate right now. But I will get a hymnal out and I will sing hymns by myself and remind myself of the truths of who God is and what God thinks of me. And it helps. It helps considerably. Read the Psalms. Things like that are all very, very helpful. You want to practice the presence of God. The one thing we learned from experiencing God is that God is at work around us all the time. And God is with us all the time. So, Brother Lawrence developed this, was a monk, about practicing the presence of God, that God is with us. And if God is with us, then God wants to communicate with us, so we can communicate with God. And so we think of something we're thankful for, and rather than holding that into a designated prayer time, we could say, thank you, Lord, for that encouragement. Thank you, Lord, for that person. Thank you, Lord, for that conversation. Thank you, Lord, for using me. And just to, have this attitude of gratitude. I don't think that we pause to be grateful as much as we should. And we really are blessed, with a lot. The fact that we live in a place where we are wealthier than like 90% of everybody else in the world. And the things that we enjoy, the things that maybe we take for granted. And we can be thankful for that. Even in a negative situation, a person's going through a health crisis, a person's going through a family crisis, person's doing whatever. The reality of it is that we can be thankful for our health. We can be thankful for our family. Not to say that all of this is perfect, not to say that we're better than, but to say in recognizing the absence of something, then I can recognize in myself the presence of something. And I can be thankful that God has given me hope for tomorrow. I think hope is probably the most scarce commodity that there is in the world. Get perspective. And this is part of, what we're going through now is part of a greater whole. And some of those things are bad and some of those things are good. I used to think, we have seasons of our life are good and seasons of our life are bad. And the reality is for most of us, and Rick Warren talks about this, it's like the two tracks of a train. That one track you have good things going on, and the other track simultaneously you have bad things going on, and they're all happening at the same time. I mean, you look at Rick Warren and writing the second best-selling book of all time, founding this great church, influencing so many pastors, having influence, all over the world, and yet the parallel to that in his life for 27 years was his son Matthew, who is mentally ill, and dealing with everything that involves. And I'm sensitive to that because I have a similar situation in my life. And so it's not going to be, when this lets up. There's always going to be something. In fact, Rick Warren says you're either in a problem, coming out of a problem, or going into a problem. Those are kind of three stages of being. You're never at this place of, okay, well, when we get through this, then it's going to be, it's going to be more manageable. I can focus more on spiritual things. I can put more into ministry or whatever. But when we go through something, we need to say, okay, this isn't an accident. God is not surprised by anything that happens in our lives. God is never going to say, oh, myself, I can't believe that happened. He's not going to be surprised like that. Now, sometimes we don't understand, and we go through devastating things, and we don't understand why those things happen. But it's like this is a small part of a greater whole, and we may not understand that right now. We also know it's not always going to be like this, and that God is going to come through for us, and then acknowledge what God has done for you. I mean, the old song, count your blessings, right? And stop and think about the things that God has done for us, from saving us on through, of sparing our life, and, the way that people drive around where I live. I thank God for sending me, a guardian angel to protect me from the other crazy drivers, whatever that might be. So just some thoughts. So again, when you're in a place where you feel kind of burned out, and again, it could be like after a big Easter weekend, or it could be just from an accumulation of years and years and years of stuff. You want to recover physically first. Focus on that. Secondly, you want to recover emotionally. And then thirdly, you want to focus on the spiritual part. And if you flip-flop that, it creates some weirdness. Because then you're like, well, why isn't God giving me more energy? Why isn't God helping me feel better? Well, God's wired us to be a certain way. God worked for 6 days and rested on one, and we're not God. So we can't work 7 days and not take a day off. And so we need to set aside time. Now, for pastors, we're kind of busy on Sunday. I'm not anymore. I go to church, but I'm not busy on Sunday because I'm not serving at a church. But, if you're a pastor, you're busy on Sunday. Maybe you're busy on Saturday night, so you need to find another day. When I was a pastor, my Sabbath, if you will, was Friday because that was my day off. And I didn't have anything else. I didn't have to think about Sunday. My week was finished, so Friday was my Sabbath. And I would get out of town and go do things, or I would, I wouldn't do like housework and stuff like that. I would just have a day that I could just rest. And the interesting thing is, it's kind of like the tithe. You give 10% of your income, and then lo and behold, you can live on 90%. Well, you take that Sabbath, and lo and behold, you can get everything done that you need to have done in 6 days. And, and that may go back, and this is getting way deep into the stress management stuff. I'll have to do a course on this sometime. But, even going back and evaluating, and it's like, what are the things that you're doing that you don't need to do anymore? What are the things you could delegate to somebody else? What are the things that you're doing that nobody cares about? So that's an interesting challenge. So stop doing that for whatever that thing is for a month and see if anybody mentions it. And if nobody brings it up, then just stop doing it entirely. Now, if it's in your job description, you're required to do it, that may be another story. But there are a lot of things that we do we think are so important, and then they disappear and nobody misses it. And it's like, well, why was I killing myself for that, right? All right, so let's go on and talk about what we do with this Easter crowd, because that's probably more of why you're here. But I thought I'd give you the first part too, just because that's something that I've studied and presented a lot of places over the years. And I don't know that we talk about it enough, about caring for ourselves. You can look at ministries like Lance Witt has a ministry called Replenish. Mindy Caliguire has a ministry called Soul Care. And I think they're significant ministries because it's one thing to work hard and to be effective for God. It's another thing when our self-worth comes from our work more than it comes from who we belong to. And then we tend to work ourselves to death. And then people will look back and go, oh, whatever happened to that guy? He was so effective. He did such great work. And again, it's like, it's not good to burn out. It's not good to rust out. It's good to wear out gradually. So, okay, when will you see your Easter crowd again? Now, some of our people, I had a pastor in California, the first pastor I went to work with, and on Easter Sunday, he would say to people, and if I don't see you in a while, Merry Christmas. So we have some people that they come on the two biggest Christian days of the year, Easter and Christmas, and we don't see them. Now, the average across the country, a person attends church 1.6 times per month. I'm working with one church that their average is their people come 0.8 times a month, but they're in they're in Colorado. So when it's nice weather, they're out. When it's bad weather, it's good weather because they're skiing and stuff. And they only have 8 Sundays a year that are like big Sundays at their church. And the rest of the year, they have 0.8 times a month. So most of their church doesn't even attend once a month. So but the average is 1.6 times per month. I think Willow at one point said theirs was 1.7 times per month. So they're attending, if everybody came on Easter, if it's part of your church, which tends to be a big part of the Easter crowd, and then you'll have, some of their friends that they invited, you'll have some visitors, some family members that were in town. But for the most part, Easter is big because that's when everybody who calls your church their church shows up. And if they attend 1.6 times a month, you're not going to see them again for another 4 to 6 weeks. And then some people, you think, well, maybe we're never going to see them again. Maybe they were here and they visited once and they're not sure, or, they weren't ready for it, or, whatever else. It's not that you did a bad job. A lot of times they're just not ready. And so when are we going to see them again? And so the question of this is, anytime we have any kind of a large event, we need to look at it and say, is this a catalyst or is this a container? And that's a question I got from Brett Eastman. So is this a catalyst or is this a container? So catalyst being, if I have this big crowd on Easter Sunday, then can I use Easter Sunday to launch something and have a next step? And it's not just Easter. It's going to be, if I have a men's conference, a women's conference, a marriage conference, any kind of event that I have in my church, a special speaker coming in. One of the churches here in Greenville had Josh McDowell last night. So then you have that event, and then what's the next step from that event? So people came because they were interested in a topic. They came because they had a problem. They came because they're working on something. They came because it's Easter and everybody goes to church on Easter. And then from that, what can I offer them as a next step? So if I bring in a speaker, has that speaker written a curriculum? Has that speaker written a book? And then I could start groups based on some of the materials from that speaker. If it's people come to Christ on Easter, then how can I get them into a group? If it's people that in general are part of our church and we only see them every 4 to 6 weeks, then what is it that I could offer them that they could receive something related to their spiritual growth on a regular basis, even though we know they're not going to be in church except for maybe 1.6 times a month. So this is what you could do this week. I know this is Thursday. But this is not impossible. You could send an email about something new that's coming this next weekend, this next Sunday. You can send that email right now, and you don't even have to tell them what it is. And maybe it'll get a few more people back. And then you need to figure out what the something new is going to be as soon as possible, because obviously you've got to get something going for Sunday. So you can find a group study that goes with the next sermon series this week. So where's your pastor going to go on Sunday? What's his topic going to be? If he speaks in a series, you're lucky. So is there a topic? Is it a book of the Bible? Is there a curriculum that would relate to the same topic, even if it doesn't relate exactly? I'm not talking about a line series where the study and the sermon are perfectly synced together, but is there something that, based off of whatever the series is starting on Sunday, that you could have a curriculum? Then you can ask people to invite their friends, and that's a whole bigger conversation about small group strategy and all that we're not going to get to today. But just that statement, how simple is that? We're going to offer something that's going to go along with the sermon series, and if you would be willing to get together with your friends, we're going to help you get started. Now, I just asked people to lead a group, but I didn't use the word lead and I didn't use the word group. Ask people to invite their friends. Here are some materials. We're going to help you. We're going to put an experienced leader in your life. We're going to coach you. We're going to send you training by email, however that works. Send some video. And then what do you do this next week, though? Because they're starting on Sunday. Well, next week they could have an open house. So if they're a week behind, that's not the end of the world. They could have an open house next week, and then the following week they could start doing something. So what could you do? Like I said, you could go out and buy something, or the other thing you could do is you could create your own curriculum. I know this sounds daunting, but everybody just take a breath. And maybe maybe the stress is what I'm saying on the webinar right now, and you're like, you know what? I need to go lay down. I need to go take a walk. I need to stop listening to you. Feel free. But just take a breath and imagine this is possible. I know it's Thursday. Okay. So what do you need to create your own curriculum? You need to write 5 or 6 questions based on the sermon. 5 or 6 questions. You don't need 20 questions. You don't need in-depth questions. You need 5 or 6 questions, and in a minute, I'm going to give you the framework of how you should do those 5 or 6 questions. Then you need to shoot a 5-minute video with your pastor or whoever's teaching on the weekend. And in the video, while the content's still fresh in their mind, so you could do this after a Saturday night service, you could do this between Sunday services, but 5 minutes. And you don't have to get fancy. You could shoot this with a phone. Shoot a 5-minute video of either the pastor giving a recap of the message or the pastor giving kind of a personal insight into the message and maybe leading to an application of the message. Well, it's fresh in their mind. No preparation is necessary. It's all in their head because they've either just preached the sermon or they're just about to preach it again. And capture a 5-minute video, upload it to YouTube. Don't burn any DVDs. Put it on YouTube. As easy as can be. You can do all of this with your phone, with an iPad, whatever. And then put the YouTube link in a downloadable discussion guide. So people open up this, PDF or whatever of your discussion guide. And at the top, there's a link to a video. They click the video, and they can watch the video together with their friends. And if they have Apple TV or they have Roku or, any of those things, they can usually cast the YouTube video to that device, and it'll show it on the TV for the whole group. So they click the link, they watch the video, they have 5 or 6 questions, which ends with some sort of application, and then you have a curriculum where they're getting a second exposure to what was preached on the weekend, which from a Christian education point of view will actually be more effective in driving the point home. I grew up in a church where we went to Sunday school, Sunday morning church service, Sunday night service, and a midweek Bible study, and then other things kind of sprinkled in there. And that was what we were taught was the pathway to heaven right there. Well, we got a lesson in Sunday school that had nothing to do with the sermon on Sunday morning, which had nothing to do with the sermon on Sunday night, which had nothing to do with the midweek Bible study. And so now I'm giving 4 things that I need to be responsible for. I can't even remember them, let alone do something about them. And then we feel guilty that we're not doing enough. Whereas if they hear the message on the weekend, they revisit that message in their group, and then they're given some sort of next step to live out that next week, and then they check in with the group the following week on how that went. From an educational standpoint, that makes a lot more sense than some of the things that we're doing with our people. And so you take this downloadable discussion guide, you can put it up on your church's website, you could send a link to it, put it in Dropbox, put it in something that you have available. You don't have to get fancy, you don't have to buy anything. Dropbox or Box.com or some of these cloud services are free. You just upload it in there. You can create a link to that. It'll give you a link. You could send that link out to your leaders. You could send that link out to all of your people. You can put it on your website and advertise it in your bulletin. Say, hey, if you want to get together with a couple of friends, download this discussion guide. There's a video component, and then you can go from there. And that actually works. Now you could get a little more elaborate with your curriculum. So what would you need to do if you wanted to create something that was a little more robust? You're probably not going to do that this week, but you could do it for future campaigns. Well, you need somebody to shoot the video. And it probably shouldn't be a staff member, because especially on the weekend they're busy. They're not going to have time to shoot a video. But it could be a volunteer. I had one church that their videographer was the pastor's 15-year-old son. You need somebody that can edit the video, which in that church there was also the pastor's 15-year-old son. You need somebody who can write. This may be you, but it's probably smarter to find several people that are interested in learning to write curriculum and form a team, and then they would all submit their questions. One church, they used their phones and they texted the questions to the small group pastor during the service. And so by the end of that first service, the small group pastor could compile the good questions, put them in the discussion guide, grab the video, the link off of YouTube, put the link in there, upload it or send it out to your group leaders, and boom, you have a curriculum. Photographer, if you're doing like an actual study guide, which would be a bigger project maybe for fall, a graphic designer, maybe somebody to help you just develop a template, but don't feel like, oh no, I don't have a template. I couldn't write a discussion guide for this week's sermon. Forget what I just said. Send out the most basic Word document looking thing this weekend for your group leaders with a link to the video and 5 questions in it, and just get started. And then if for the larger scale, you may want to have a project manager if it's a volunteer that maybe they do project management at work or whatever that can help oversee this process so it's not one more thing for you to have to do every week. I hope this is making sense. Now, you're not going to find all of these people this week. This week, it's all you. But you can do this and have it available for groups that meet Sunday afternoon. It can totally happen. Don't get fancy. Just do it. Say that to yourself out loud. Don't get fancy. Just do it. So here's a discussion guide. Every discussion guide is made up of 4 sections. Every discussion guide in the world. If it's Beth Moore, if it's Tony Evans, if it's, you name it, curriculum out there, it's all the same when you get down to it. Every discussion has an icebreaker. They have observation questions, they have interpretation questions, they have application questions, and then you end in prayer. So the things that you need to write, some kind of an icebreaker. So there are books, you can go on to Amazon, there are electronic books and physical books. The one I've used called Icebreakers and Heartwarmers. Cheryl Shireman wrote a great book on icebreakers a few years ago. I don't recall the name right now. She's also a novelist, so you probably, if you Google Cheryl Shireman, you'll get all of her novels, but she does have a book on icebreakers in there. Or you could just Google icebreakers or go on to smallgroups.com, and they have tons of icebreakers on there. So you need some kind of icebreaker question, some question that anybody can answer, and then maybe a follow-up question of, last week you committed to trying something this week, tell the group how it went. What does the Bible say? So whatever passage the pastor's using, have a couple questions in here asking, the answers are in the passage. And then what does that passage mean? And then what am I expected to do about that passage? And then they take prayer requests, and that is your discussion guide. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Now, it could be that the observation, interpretation, application, it could be that this it could, the titles of the sections could be your church's values. Like I was at a church last weekend in Tennessee, or weekend before in Tennessee, and their values are belong, discover, engage. So when I look at this, template for a discussion guide, the belong could definitely be the icebreaker. The discover section could be the observation and interpretation. The engage section could be the application. I mean, how simple is that? And this is all over their church, and it's just one more way that they can enforce their church's values. So a couple of writing tips. I do see we have a question in the question box, which I will get to in a minute. Use helps. Don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. Don't feel like, oh, I've got to, study and get out my Kittle and get into all the Greek and get my Kyle and Delitzsch, because you might go to the Old Testament or something. This is only for your church. So NavPress years ago developed a system called Lesson Maker. And I don't think it's in print anymore, but you can go onto Amazon, or you can go into, this is a good site for anything regarding books. It's a bot. It's called fetchbook.info. So fetch, F-E-T-C-H, book.info. Fetchbook.info. It will search like 100 online sites and will find every place that is certain. You can put the title in, you can put the author in, you can put the ISBN number in, and it will tell you every place that it's available. I mean, including eBay. Now, some of those are auctions, and then you also have to check if it's a low price and what quality it is. But Lesson Maker is a great one, because I know that NavPress created a Lesson Maker for the New Testament, and it has questions for every passage in the New Testament. And so that's a great one. And so you're doing this for your church, right? Well, you could take Lesson Maker's questions, or you could go to the Serendipity Bible. Lyman Coleman wrote the Serendipity Bible. I think it's currently owned by Lifeway. And take the Serendipity Bible, and in the margins, Lyman put in icebreakers, observation, interpretation, application questions. Now, some of them need to be updated. I'm not particularly fond of his icebreakers, to be honest. Don't tell him I said that. He's a dear man. He's in his 80s. He just had his birthday. He's a wonderful human being and a great grandfather of the small group movement. But Serendipity Bible was, and so I would take Lesson Maker. I would take the Serendipity Bible, and I would get inspired by those, and then I would start to write the questions in my discussion guide. Another service, if you have a few bucks, is smallgroup.com. So this is singular. So before I said icebreakers, look at smallgroups.com, which is owned by Christianity Today. Smallgroup.com is owned by Lifeway. And it is actually a curriculum writing service. And I don't know what their fees are and that sort of thing. My buddy Chris Surratt is actually kind of the point person for smallgroup.com. And what you can do is you go onto smallgroup.com, and I think they'll even give you a free trial of a week or a month or something. You can look up a passage of Scripture, and they probably will have at least one lesson based on that passage, or they'll have several lessons based on that passage. Or if you're like doing a study of Leviticus or something, and they don't have a lesson, then if you know in advance, then you can request their writers to create a small group lesson based on the passage that's not there. They're kind of developing it as they go. But that's a great resource too. I want to say it's like $1,500 a year. But anyway, that's something to think about. All right, create a simple template, and I just kind of showed you icebreaker, observation, interpretation, application questions, end in prayer. Simple. But you can make your own kind of template. You could have your designer make it fancy, and then you just go in and populate the questions every week. Write the questions during the service or before if possible. And so this is what I did at our church here in Greenville. We had 3 services, and I would sit in the first service, and I would just we'd have a note-taking sheet. I would just write questions in the margins. And if the pastor asked a rhetorical question, I actually changed that and made it a discussion question for the group. And so I would just write it during the service, or like I said before, have other people do the same thing. I would go to my office during the second service. I would go through the questions. I would fill out my template, which was a Word document. It wasn't fancy. Fill out my template, turn it into a PDF, send it to the guy in IT who would put it up on the website. or you could send that out to your small group leaders. And it was done. We weren't doing video at the time. I wish we were. But there are a lot of churches that are doing that video piece now too, and that works. If you know the text, if you know where your pastor's headed this weekend, then go ahead and write some questions. You might even be able to write the whole thing. Or if your pastor, is one that, his sermon's put to bed on Thursday, then get his notes as soon as possible and go ahead and write the questions now, maybe tune it up a little bit on Sunday morning after the sermon's been preached, and then go from there. Okay, so the question we have in the chat is, what about a 5-minute excerpt from the sermon and a link to discussion questions with an invitation to come back this Sunday also can be put on Facebook? Well, I agree with the Facebook and the link. I think those are great ideas. You could send that out to people ahead of time. The 5-minute excerpt of the sermon I think is okay. The difference is, and I was just reading a book called Give Your Speech, Change the World. It's a Harvard business book. And in it they were talking about how in speech making has changed because of the advent of television. And they said that the reason, and I'm getting to my point quickly here, but the reason that it's changed speech making is because all of a sudden you had Walter Cronkite framed in a TV screen, and he was in the personal space of your living room speaking to you. And this created the sense that this was personal. And this is why people feel like they know celebrities. Or this is why people today are mourning the fact that Bill O'Reilly is not going to have a show on Fox anymore. Because he was speaking to them personally in their living rooms. So when you look at a stage and you're speaking in front of an audience, you're going to get more of a full body shot, and it's going to be further away, and it's going to seem like you're watching something, you're witnessing an event that happened. Whereas if the pastor's speaking direct to camera and it's a tighter shot, then it's going to feel more like my pastor is sitting down with me in my living room with my friends and telling us about the sermon or telling us about an application to the sermon. So if all you've got is the ability to edit the sermon and create the study and send it out, then do that. But if you have the opportunity to shoot that piece, pastor looking direct to camera, whether you use a camera, seriously, if you use a phone, then do a quick edit on that and send it out. And the way that it's framed will make all the difference in the world. Now, what I wish we could do, and it's very hard to retrain pastors, and I would hesitate to do it, what I wish is if we have cameras in the auditorium, that the pastors would look at the cameras. They would look directly at those lenses. But what we do when we speak as pastors is we look at our people. So the perception is when we watch that video of the sermon, the pastor is not looking at us because he's not looking at the camera. But if pastors looked at the camera, that would avoid a lot of this. But don't try to go in and retrain your pastor on his presentation this week. That's not going to help this. But what is going to help this is to encourage your pastor to say, Pastor, I was on a webinar this week with this crazy guy. And what he said was that more than Bill Hybels or Rick Warren or John Ortberg or anybody else, our people want to hear from you. They want to hear more of your teaching. And what would make sense is if we had a little video segment that was tied to your weekend service that the groups could use with a discussion guide during the week. That would help a lot of people get their friends together. It would help them get more out of the sermon. It would help to connect some of these people that were at Easter that we may not see again for a while. And new people would be invited to their friend's home to be a part of a study that maybe have never been to our church before. And then they get invited to church, they feel like they already know you. That's not a bad idea. And that idea actually works. And I'm not just like, this is something that off the top of my head that I came up when I was writing a blog post on Monday. This is something that I've done. This is something I've been doing for 13 years. And it works very, very well. So let's talk a little bit about video teaching. Seriously, use an iPhone. I have a church in Ajax, Ontario, Canada, outside of Toronto. And the small group pastor sits down with the senior pastor or the teaching pastor. Used to be on Sundays. Now they do it on Thursdays prior, and they shoot a 5-minute video. And honestly, when I saw the video, it was beautiful. I thought they had used other equipment, but it worked out great. And she shoots it with her phone, and the small group pastor interviews the teaching pastor for 5 minutes. They have this little discussion and then writes the questions and sends it out. And they do a beautiful job. So again, like I said, shoot between the services, do a quick edit if you need to do an edit. It doesn't need to be perfect. Here's the thing. People will appreciate the teaching from your pastor more than another pastor, and they don't mind if it's not perfect. Now, your production department may mind, but your people are not going to mind because they would rather take something that is lower quality visually that has your senior pastor on it than something that's high quality that has somebody else's pastor on it. Upload the video to YouTube, send out the link, you're good to go. All right, so let's take some time for questions. I muted you guys during the thing because I've done enough of these over the years. You have, dogs barking and toilets flushing and babies crying and stuff like that. So I'll take your questions. There's also my contact information, my email, and my phone number if you guys have questions afterwards. But what do you think? Is this something that might work in your neck of the woods? Is this something that's like, crazy? Questions if you're, thinking about do this. Tell me what your thoughts are.
Alan, this is Art Hansen from Prior Lake.
Yes, sir.
We are planning on doing exactly what you're saying this fall.
There you go.
And my goal is to get as much training underneath my belt and planning and preparation. And we are planning on doing our Pastor's Fall series.
Okay.
Exactly what you're saying today.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that and fall is probably, if you're going to do like a big, like a church-wide campaign or an alignment series, depending on how you go. It's the same thing, it's different names. Fall is fall by far is the biggest time of year. And so, you're saying something?
Yeah, so my goal will be probably like next Easter we will be ready and we will have this in place. Now we are doing, I wish I could do it this Sunday. I mean, we are, on this last Sunday, on Easter Sunday, we did promote our next series of messages all over the place. And I just wish I was ready to do it right now. But my goal, though, will be to be able to do this frequently throughout the year. So thanks, Alan.
No, you're certainly welcome. And like I said, fall's the biggest time of the year. New Year's is probably the second biggest. Easter's probably the third. Now, there were 3 reasons I never used to do groups after Easter, and the reasons were June, July, and August. And so I avoided it for a long time. But the other hand, it's like Easter is the biggest Sunday of the year by far. So about 5 years ago, we did a curriculum for Gene Apple. We did the whole thing from start to finish in 14 days, which I don't ever recommend. And it was DVDs and books and the whole bit. And they handed a book out. They had 7,000 people at Easter. This is Eastside Christian Church in Anaheim. And handed out a book out to all 7,000 people that visited at Easter. They started 460 groups on Easter Sunday, and which was pretty remarkable. And then they had to scramble to support all of that, but which was another interesting chapter. But they've got Will Johnston, who used to be at National Community Church, as their small group pastor now, so they're in great shape with Will out there. But yeah, so there are different ways to do it. Fall is by far the biggest time of the year. And in fact, I have a coaching group that's starting the beginning of May, and the entire purpose of the coaching group is to prepare from May until the fall, and then get through that fall launch so that you can have it all successfully. So that's something you guys are interested in. I can certainly send you some information on that.
Do that for me, please.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions or thoughts? You can either speak up, or there's the chat box. You can type in the chat window. I know a few of you joined after we started. So what I'll do is I'll send you a copy of the recording. I'll also send you the slide deck. So in case there's something that I went through fast that you're trying to take notes, you'll have all of that. So I should have that ready for you shortly. I have a coaching group I'm going to go into in a moment, but I do have a few more minutes if anybody has any questions.
Hey, Alan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Jesse Bolin from Gold Creek Community, just kind of north of Seattle.
Oh, hey, how are
and
you?
I'm one of the ones that tuned in late. Good, thank you.
That's all right. We won't give you a demerit or anything. So.
I was trying to log in, and I was not having success, and I finally was successful.
That's frustrating.
I'm going to go for this, I think.
Yeah.
I've been writing questions kind of sporadically along the way for groups, not consistently, but every so often offering those. So I think I'm going to go for it. My pastor was emailing me yesterday after our run-through saying, hey, what do you want me to say to push groups for this weekend? And he and I have already had this conversation after I read a blurb from your book about just, lowering the bar to start, groups exponentially.
Yep.
And so, yeah, anyways, I think I'm going to go for it. I'm going to write some questions. We're starting a series this weekend called This Is Us. It's just a relationship series. And so I'm going to write some questions and kind of get him to promote in the way that you were, encouraging us to. And I don't know that I'll be able to get a video shot with him in between, but we do film, him speaking. So if I can't pull that off, we'll at least do, like you're saying, a clip of his talk, even though that may not be totally ideal. But,
well, and I downplay that because I would like to see that tight shot of somebody looking at the camera talking to you like I'm talking to you now. But you know what? That's how Andy Stanley makes their curriculum. They just take his sermons and chop them up. And so I even put Andy in the category of, well, your curriculum is better than nothing, but it is something. So, and what the video does is it does two things. For the person who's gathering the group, it ensures them that they don't necessarily have to be the leader. They don't have to be the teacher because it's provided for them. The other thing that it does is it reassures the pastor and the staff that we know that they're not going to teach crazy things in the group because we are providing the teaching for the group. And so now you need some coaches that you can, get your experienced leaders involved in helping, track with some of these new ones. But the reality is most people are going to be so nervous about being prepared and having everything ready. They're not going to be, calculating what kind of heresy that they can, put into the discussion this week. So I've had, my problems have amounted to 2% in the churches that I've been on staff and churches that I've served. 2% is it. So yeah. So if you have 100, then you have 2. There might be a problem, but other than that, it's pretty good. Yeah. No, I think that's a great idea. I definitely go for it. And yeah, if you convince him to do otherwise in the future, then try it. But I'm excited that you're going to give this a whirl. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. How will you be distributing it?
I think I'll probably do I'd like to do the YouTube thing. That seems like a good idea. And probably put it up on our Connect page as well.
Okay.
I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because to me then, sometimes people can sneak in and, they'll grab it and do the study with a couple of friends and maybe they're not an official group. Maybe you don't even know about the group. But, I had to get to a point where I had to embrace the fact that if the whole church was studying the Bible behind my back, would that really be a problem? So, you know what I'm saying? But then sometimes if they start out in a small way like that, and then you offer something larger down the road, then they may be very much interested in, continuing on and saying, oh, yeah, we've been doing this kind of group on the sly, but, we'd like to be a group for the series. And you never know. So just a simple way for them to start. So very cool. I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
You have to let me know how it goes.
All right, we'll do.
Just don't start tweeting. Don't listen to that Alan White. He's crazy.
Oh, I know. Can I add one more thought onto there?
Absolutely.
Just for anybody else listening. I was just going to say that kind of to piggyback off of what you're encouraging us to do, we had, kind of interesting, we had Perry Noble come on Easter. Our pastor felt compelled to invite him to come, so he came up and spoke for us, and then spent the day with our staff on Monday. And given his personal circumstances, he just said, I cannot drive home to you enough, he said, the idea of community. He said to have people that you can be dangerously honest with, and just really drove that home to us as a staff. And so I think this idea of, making our stuff available on a broader scale, like what you're encouraging us to do, and just encouraging people to get into community, they don't have to be theologians, they don't have to know the Bible in depth, but just encouraging that. So he just really drove that point home to us.
That's
so
cool. Now, I don't know if you know, my family and I attend New Spring.
Oh, okay.
So Perry was actually my pastor up until July of last year.
Okay, got it.
So yeah. I miss him dearly. So I only met him once at a book signing, but I tell you what, that guy could make me laugh unlike any other person I've ever met.
Yes, yeah, he's good at that.
It's such an evangelist. So I'm glad you guys had him there. He's had a lot of things to sort out and work through and take account of and all of that. But you know what? So do all the rest of us. Maybe they're not to the degree that disqualify us, but he's a good man and he has tremendous gifts. And so I'm glad you guys invited him for Easter.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Any other questions or thoughts? Anybody else? Or Jesse, do you have more questions or thoughts?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, if you guys think of something afterward, or I'll send you some information I'll send you the recording and everything. I'll also send you some information on the coaching that I do, and you can take a look at that. If you have any questions, my email's on the screen. My phone number's on the screen. It rings this phone. So I'm open for the next hour. I have the top of the next hour. I have a coaching group that I need to attend to, and but beyond that, I'm pretty flexible today. So thank you for being here. Thank you for giving me your time, and I hope that you're encouraged and maybe a little inspired, maybe a little irritated. That's okay. Think about all the stuff and decide what makes sense for your church. All right. God bless you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks so much. You too.
Bye-bye.